Everybody, welcome back to the Insiders Lounge. Today we have another special episode and another special guest. Temisan, thank you for joining us and feel free to introduce yourself.
Chad, it's an absolute pleasure being on. I've seen the guests that you've had on, so I feel very privileged to be speaking with you today, and you're doing a fantastic job. And yes, so I have worked within football for almost 15 years, majority as a coach, and now I am effectively, if you like, a talent coach educator.
Yeah, I think a little bit of everything. We'll get into that later on down the line. But first, I always love to hear your first footballing memory. What was it? And then we'll get into your background and a little bit more about what you're doing today.
Yes, so my first footballing memory, I think I was about 5 years of age, and I saw Man United at that time. So the players who they had were Eric Cantona, you had Paul Ince, and it was that era where you had some really robust players where they could get kicked up in the air. You had the crazy gang of Wimbledon. You had the likes of Real Madrid really starting to come to the fore with R9, Ronaldo, and Zidane. So that was my early era of football, and I just got hooked from age 5 onwards. That was me. That was my sport.
Yeah, so then growing up, if we want to get into, if you kind of want to align your like family upbringing and growing up, but also your footballing journey, I'd love to hear kind of both parts of how you grew up.
Yes, so born, raised in London, and at about the age of 2, I then went to live in the Caribbean. Both my parents are from the Caribbean, Jamaica and Trinidad, and so I lived in Tobago for about 3 years before coming back to London. And growing up in London, of course, you're going to play football as the sport, the main sport. And both my parents have their own football teams. So my dad is a Nottingham Forest fan from the days of Nigel Clough. And obviously he's very happy to see them after many years.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
He's waited a long time. And my mum has been a Liverpool fan from the days of Souness and the like. So she's obviously very happy as to how they're doing at the moment and of recent. And in terms of my upbringing, so it was we had a very close knit family. So my grandma was here. I had one grandma in America, but one of my grandmas was here, and a lot of family was here as well. And we didn't live too far away from each other when we were in West London, and we saw each other pretty much every weekend with my cousins, and it was a fantastic time growing up, and you just had that closeness with family. And one of the things we did regularly, going to church on a Sunday as well, and so kind of taking that forward into my adult years now, especially having my own family.
When you discuss like your playing career, I look at like myself, and I would say around the age of 12, 13, 14, didn't have a chance of necessarily going professional. And I think there was almost a switch in my head of like, you know what? I know I'm not going professional, but I'm very interested in the sport. So how can I get more insight from the coaching perspective? Like I almost felt like the coach on the bench because I wasn't really playing much. So I thought I might as well start understanding, okay, how can I analyze the game differently? How can I give insights to my teammates where they might appreciate this from a different player's perspective and so on? Yeah. Was there a clicking point in your career ever where you said, hey, maybe professional is the route. Maybe I should keep pursuing it. Maybe it isn't the route. Maybe coaching is something I want to get more into. And then also touch on the educational side, because it seems like you have such a passion for that side of the game. And also getting into like your education growing up as well would be interesting.
Sure. So football, I feel like I had a great childhood growing up in terms of football, both on the pitch and then in terms of playing, if you like, computer games. So playing, I had some really great neighbors who were excellent at football. Most of them were older than me, and I thought I got a very good education on the hard surfaces and the concrete ground. And one of my best friends, actually growing up, he was actually probably the one of the youngest of us all. He ended up actually going and being signed by QPR, and he went all the way through to under 18s, and then another person I grew up with, he ended up playing for as well for QPR. And I remember seeing him a couple of years later making his debut and playing against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. And that was brilliant to see those who you knew around you being able to make it to that level. And I think from there, it again really sparked my desire to just improve as a player. And I thought I was a decent grassroots player. There did come a point where I was about 17 where I knew that okay, it's not going to happen for me, but I want to enjoy my football still, and
Mm.
I was able to play at the first team level of my university at the time, Westminster, and I really enjoyed that. But of course, midway through, I thought to myself, okay, how am I going to continue this? And the next best thing for me was actually to go into coaching because I wanted to help those who wanted to get to the top level. I wanted to help their dreams to come true. And so that was really my core passion that came out from football, and me coming out of being able to actually play at the highest level. And then when it came to education, I I was always a decent student, if you like. I never particularly had any challenges at school, but football was always on the brain, constantly on the brain. And funny enough, I was actually going down the route of being a doctor, but then I decided midway through my biomedical science degree, I said, it's not what I want to do. I could probably do it, but I would absolutely hate it. And if you're going to be a doctor, you know, it's absolutely critical for obviously saving lives and for making sure that people are healthy and well. And I thought, I just don't have the deep passion for that.
Mm.
So let me follow what I know I really want to do. And that's where I did then decided to do a sports science master's and set myself a plan to go through the coaching badges.
Yeah, so then getting into your coaching career, obviously, if anyone's seen your content or looked at your LinkedIn and so on, you see these big names, West Ham, Spurs, Arsenal, clubs that you've worked for. But I know there's always a humble beginning, and there's always that
Mm,
breakthrough moment of getting into the, whether it's the football industry in this case or just the sports industry. I think is such an industry that everyone wants to work for. There's so much passion and, oh, I want to work for my favorite team or work for a federation or whatever that might be, but there's always that moment of breakthrough. Can you tell us that moment for you?
definitely. So I was quite fortunate. I think the team who I was able to coach for first, they poured a lot into me, and I was just searching because I didn't have anyone who I was going along this journey with. There was no one else I knew who wanted to be a football coach, and I thought, okay, where do I start? I knew the FA. Okay, right, let me go and look online and see which club will take me. And there was a club who were attached to a church, and I thought, okay, let me go and I was able to get my badges through them. They paid for four of my badges. So
Wow.
my level one, level two, which is now UEFA C, and then my youth module one, youth module two. And they also allowed me to go to South Africa where I led a coach education program for coaches in South Africa in a government settlement city called Cosmo City. And that was life changing for me because not only did I see how much we are privileged where we are here in the West in terms of structure and being able to get to certain places and opportunities in
Hmm.
terms of football, but also from a poverty point of view, because we lived in the government settlement, it was right opposite mansions, and it was just crazy for me to really put that together in my mind because I'd never seen that before. Of course, coming from London, and so that really, from a personal point of view, gave me an even better drive to say, okay, the opportunities I have to maximize them, but also how can I help these coaches who still have dreams? What can I do to really help them as well here? And I'm still in contact with actually one of the coaches, and this is now I think 13 years later, that we still have a relationship. So that for me was quite special as a moment. And I think from there, that really helped to progress me forward. And alongside that, when I was doing my UEFA C license, and I mentioned it on the Overlap podcast I was on, someone very early on in my mentorship. So apart from Tim and Andy, who were at Hub Athletic at the church team,
Mhm.
was someone called Ian Hart, who was my UEFA C license or level 2 license coach, educator, and he took me under his wing and mentored me, and he helped open up doors and opportunities for me, which I'm tremendously grateful for. We're friends today, and I think it really helped to catapult me to where I've been able to get to.
What do you think inspires people to do that? Like, I'm sure you almost feel a sense of, okay, someone's helped me break through and kind of move to that next level or that next goal that I have in mind. What do you think inspired those people that helped you? And then sort of what inspires you then to go on and help others? I'm curious that
Yeah,
kind of chain reaction, I guess you could say.
I would like to think that it was the case that I was consistent. They could see that I had a desire, even though I didn't have the experience. And so I just boldly asked them, can you be my mentor? Can you help me with this? Is there anything else that I can do? And I always looked to go above and beyond. So, for example, at Hub Athletic, I started, even though it was a volunteer role, I started writing weekly, if you in academies it's called IDPs, which is individual development
Mhm.
plans. But I started writing those for players. Bearing in mind this was a senior men's team, but I thought I'm going to write them for these players. And I sometimes I had to do 20 on a Saturday, get up early on a Saturday morning or Friday night and do them for these players. And it got to a point where the players expect it, and they were looking for it each and every week. Like, tell me, where's my report? Where's the, I want to see what were some of the things you saw in the game and during training, etc. And I think seeing those additional aspects that I did, I think probably helped them to see how serious I was about going down this path. And it was the same thing with Ian Hart, where I would travel sometimes to where he was to actually just deliver sessions to get experience for him to see me and for him to give me feedback on my session delivery.
If we had a sit down when you were at Hub Athletic and we had a chat similar to
Yeah.
this, and we were discussing your future goals, aspirations, what you had in mind in terms of building a family and going on with coaching, what would you have said then in terms of those goals and things? Has it changed quite a bit, or would you say you're kind of on the trajectory that you always thought you were going to be on?
Sure. Just before that, I just want to finish on the last point that you were asking me around now when it's flipped and
Yeah, yeah.
there are other coaches who are now speaking to me. One of the things that's really key for me is just to understand what is the journey you've been on and what's the journey that you want to go to. And whenever I speak to coaches, I ask them, do you have a 10-year plan? Because that's something that I did. And I'll tell you a bit of a reason behind it. But I ask them, do they have a 10-year plan? And if not, can you put it together? When we then go through it, the first question I ask them, is this something that excites you? And if they tell me no or maybe, say go back and do it again, because it's got to be a journey you're excited by. And that's the key for me. So when I did my 10-year plan, one of the reasons I did it over 10 years is because I knew that the players at that time would be coaches in 10 years' time. And if I was ever to coach alongside them,
Mm.
I needed to know what I was talking about, especially against someone who's had 300, 400, 500 games at the top level. Now, you mentioned about Hub Athletic and how things maybe have changed or may not have changed. Initially, I was absolutely obsessed with AVB and Mourinho. Those were the two I was trying to research everything about them. I was trying to get documentation about them. I think I managed to get Andre Villas-Boas's scouting report that he did for Chelsea against Newcastle, which I think he submitted to Bobby Robson. And I was just obsessed with getting as
Yeah.
much as I could. I read all their books, all their biographies. But then as I went through the academy system, one of the things that really stuck out to me was the amount of players that came into the system and went out so quickly. And so, although my aim initially was to go and work at the first team level, I just couldn't I just couldn't move forward to and progress to that level, even though initially I wanted to, because I just had a deep care for wanting to see players have as best experience as they could in the academy system, knowing fully well that the majority of them will end up not playing professional football. And so that really became my passion and my driver.
Yeah, so I think it's best if we move into that time then. If you want to kind of explain it, I would say our audience is very global. So it's not even
Mm.
just from the UK specifically. You've got a big American audience and then even across Europe and so on. So I'd love for you to dive into let's even start with the three clubs that I mentioned already, sort of Spurs, West Ham, and Arsenal. Your times there, sort of what your role was like in each one and what maybe varied in between the roles and your times and like actual experience within the club itself.
Sure. So just to give you a bit more around it,
Mhm.
Cambridge Centre of Excellence for Girls was actually my first, if you like, academy experience. And that was a really great grounding for me to understand a bit more around the structure, obviously the level of players that were there as well in the female game. And it wasn't as it is now, but the level was definitely very high. And we played against clubs such as Arsenal and Aston Villas, etc. And then from there, I went to Tottenham, and I was at Tottenham for a year. And this was as an academy apprentice, and I was there for that season. And that really helped me to understand what coaching looked at the highest level with some unbelievably talented players. And many of those players who I remember are playing in first teams now. One of them who I thought I'd seen the English Messi was Marcus Edwards, who's now playing at Sporting CP. And obviously, we've seen what Pochettino said about him. But one of the things that really stuck out to me at Tottenham was that every single one of the coaches had technical excellence. So whenever they demonstrated something, they demonstrated it just as good as the players. You know, they would, for example, I remember I was I was observing Justin Cochran, who's now at Brentford first team, and they were doing volleys about 30 yards away from each other. The volley would come into you, and he would keep the ball up. It doesn't touch the ground. He keep the ball up, sidewind volley all the way to the player. The player keeps it up, and I thought to myself, "Tell me, can you do that?" it
I've
was
got some learning to do after
yeah,
this.
exactly, and so for me, that just I think helped to really help me understand. Okay, this is a level. It's not. Yes, it's about the coaching and in the sense of what you say, how you set up your practices, but that's also a tool that you need to understand. You need to go and practice if I need to go to the park, etc. Spend time out, which I did do along my journey when at times I couldn't play. Whether it be 11v11, etc., or Power League, which is 5v5, I decided to do a bit of that because I knew that I needed to make sure that I had a certain technical level to be able to demonstrate for the players. And so that was key for me. Moving on from there, I then went on to Southend United, and I was there for 2.5 years. And at the same time, I was at West Ham. But at West Ham, I was actually doing education, and I was leading the education department there. And within within Southend United, and I always encourage this for any coach, it's really important, I think, to have experience at lower league clubs because one, you don't have as many resources, and so it helps you to be that much more creative as a coach. But two, there's a little bit more maneuverability around different departments at the club. And so, for example, when I was at Southend United, I was able to start a bio-banding session or tournament, if you like, which I was able to liaise with the lead phase of the under 16s as well as the um, of the youth development phase, and also the head sports science there. And so being able to have those experiences helped add more strings to my bow.
Mm.
And then while I was at West Ham, in terms of the education department, I was able to actually work with quite a lot of players off the pitch So see their interests off the pitch and also help them to be able to engage with the local community and see the inspiration that they have in the local community, which sometimes isn't promoted as much. It is more so now, but I think there's a lot more to see of what players do off the pitch, and seeing players like Mark Noble, Mikel Antonio, how they encouraged Matt Jarvis, who is no longer here, no longer at West Ham and is no longer playing, but seeing how those players actually integrated with the local community, encouraged, inspired the local community, was great to be able to see the power of football outside of just the pitch. And then I was at Fulham. At Fulham was a really good experience for me in terms of it was the first club whereby there was more of a focus on developing technique in game-based scenarios. So I didn't do many technically isolated practices, and it was quite interesting because I recently had a conversation with Michael Pulcares from Espanyol, head of F7 methodology there. And one of the things he said that in Spain, one of the things they don't do as often is unopposed technical practices. He said they don't really understand it because actually you have to make a decision on the ball with a player, with two players who you have to consider. And so this really stretched me as a coach, that approach. And then Arsenal was for 5 years. Just the level of players was probably the best players I've ever coached, and that really, one, it stretches you as a coach to be able to see those fine details, but two, it really makes you appreciate how good some of these young players really are. And just to give you an example, I had the pleasure of coaching Max Dowman for a few years, who at 14 started training with the first team. And when you see them before that, you can see inklings, but then just to see how they catapult, it's great as an experience. But also, I was able to spend some time as a talent ID scout and also coach because I wanted to get an experience of what it meant to actually find the players, see potential, and bring them in. And I have huge respect for anyone in recruitment because it is a tough job to be able to do so. But also, it made me to realize how much, as coaches, sometimes we may not appreciate what the scouts do, and they may bring in a player. We think after 30 minutes, 1 hour, I don't know if he or she's going to make it within this team. But to see the level of work they go into just to bring that player in, I think I think as a coach, it gave me a different perspective and a huge respect for them.
You mentioned the impact that the sort of community service aspects, for example, at West Ham, you were discussing the players being in the community, the impact that that actually had on the player. And then you mentioned even your personal experience in South Africa and how football was kind of an integral part of that. But really, football was just a tool used for you to have a different type of impact. Can we discuss that a little bit more, like specifically from the players' side? Being involved in the community, sort of the educational aspect, all these other things that people don't see from the outside. You just see, oh yeah, these players just train every day, and then all of a sudden they make it as a pro, and a bunch don't. Like, can you dive into more of the players' side of things and how football can be used to have that community impact and beyond that, even for the player themselves?
Definitely. So one of the programs which I oversaw was helping. And this is what we call in the UK a pupil referral unit, which is young people who aren't in the traditional schooling system, mainly because of either behavior challenges or potentially they may be at risk of gang affiliation, all those types of things. And so they're in a separate schooling system or setting, if you like. And so being able to take those young people to the training ground and to speak with the likes of Mark Noble, Michael Antonio, Fabianski, it gave them an understanding of, wow, wait a minute, these are just normal people, but they've given me their time, and finding out their story as well. Like Michael Antonio, for example, he, I believe, wasn't at an academy, and he then, of course, was able to from non-league, be able to go Peterborough, and then from there West Ham, and seeing that actually if you just focus on doing the right habits and also making sure that you've got a laser focused goal and leave distractions, because he talked about distractions that he could have had and how those around him could have he could have gone a different route, but being able to now see where he is, it was a testament to them that actually you can make one or two decisions that can transform your life in phenomenal ways and your family's life in phenomenal ways. And I remember him always saying that his kids won't be able to understand because they now go to private school. So and that's how quickly it can change in a generation. And so that really gave the young people inspiration as to actually I can do something quite phenomenal here if I just make a different decision.
And then from the player side, like what impact do you think those conversations had for them?
I think for the players, it just reminded them of the fact that the impact they can have on whoever it is. I mainly was involved in work with young people, and you could see how that mentorship, even if it was just half an hour, 1 hour, they immediately became mentors, and they really enjoyed giving as much information, as much support as they could at that point in time. And they were in the room. And I think that's always a thing I always looked for. Are they in the room at that point in time? Are they really engaged in what they're doing? And you could see that they were. And for me, that showed how much players have to give when they care about something deeply, which these players did. They wanted to be involved in the local community and didn't want to be wrapped in cotton wool. They actually wanted to be out there and engaged with the community, because when you think about it, after 2 o'clock, they're pretty much going home.
Yeah. There's not much going on.
No.
You mentioned from the academy side how when you first got into, I think it was Spurs that you mentioned it, where the technical ability of the coaches themselves. I'm curious other aspects that you had where going in you might have expected one thing, and then as you were in the system, just in academies in general, you were like, oh, this is completely different to what I thought it would be. I'm curious, like if an aspiring academy coach, let's say, is listening in on this and goes, hey, I think this might happen if I get a job here, but I'm curious from your end now that you've experienced it, some of those things that you expected and didn't end up being the way you thought.
So the technical detail when I was at Tottenham, again, not just from, as I mentioned, what the coaches could do technically themselves, but the information they gave the players. So, for example, Kieran McKenna talking about shoulder depth when you're taking your first touch, and you hear players even now talking about how he's helped them to be able to develop technically. So that was really key for me to understand. I was also introduced to analysis at that time, and seeing how coaches, because there were a lot of coaches who were doing analysis but also coached on the pitch as well, and how they took the experience from clips that they were seeing of players into how they would support the players on the pitch. And that was again really novel for me. Of course, we see analysis is really critical now, but I do think that it's important for coaches to be able to understand the both, but also not become too focused on analysis in the sense that you're now not allowing the players to be able to still be free in their movements and what they do, and you want to make sure that you don't use it as a stick, and sometimes it can become that way potentially, where you say, okay, you haven't done this, you haven't done this, you haven't done this. And so it's really important to make sure you're highlighting the strengths of players and how you utilize that. And then at Southend, and this was a great experience for me, we had a quarter pitch, and I was coaching under 16s, then I was coaching under 15s. And I remember there was one day I had about 26 players on a quarter pitch as under 15s. I thought, how am I going to do this session? And it really just, as a coach, it really stretches your mind to understand, how am I going to get out particular topics, objectives, whereby the players aren't standing around, whereby there's transitions in what I'm doing, whereby I'm helping the players to see pictures related to the pitch, even though I'm only on a quarter pitch and it's for an under 15 age group. And so it helped me to really be creative as a coach in my practices and how I considered them for the players to get the maximum output they could. And then at Fulham, as I mentioned before, it was the case around developing technique in games. But one of the things that really did stand out for me, so I had the pleasure of having Ben Bartlett, who's of course in the US now as a pro licensed educator. He was our head of coaching, and he helped me through my the last bit of my A license. And one of the things he did was that when I went to a game, he observed me at a game, and what he did is mark every time I spoke to a particular player and where that player was playing on the pitch. And off the back of it, it made me to understand that I think it was about 63% of the time I spoke to the players nearest to me, and maybe only 20% of the time those who were furthest from the pitch. And that was really life-changing for me, because now I was super conscious as to how I'm communicating with which player, and it started to make me think about coaching the furthest player from the pitch first, or giving information to that player first before then coming to the player nearest to me. And then when I got to Arsenal, one of the initial philosophies involved helping players to go from being unconsciously incompetent to being unconsciously competent. And when I first heard those terms, I thought, I'm back at science school here. I don't know.
I think that's what I just experienced right now.
And I spoke to one of the coaches. I said, look, can you just, and it was the lead phase at the time. I said, can you just sit down with me for an hour? I really need to understand this, what this actually looks like on the pitch, or giving me examples of it. And that was where I really started to understand, okay, the detail, the level of depth you go into as a coach in terms of your preparation is key for making sure that the players, of course, who you're coaching, you're giving everything possible for them to be able to develop. And so that was a great experience again. So all of them, all in all, all of them provided a fantastic education in their own right for me.
And from the talent ID, scouting, and recruitment perspective, I'm curious because you always see, X player has gone to this club on trial and they never got him, and 10 years later he's one of the best players in the world. I'm curious, you finally got to sit in that person's boots and understand, okay, this is what we're looking at for this player at X age. So
I was very fortunate with the person who was leading it. His name was Conan, and he used to work at England before he came to Arsenal. And I remember sitting down with him, and he was talking about, for example, the shapes of players: ectomorph, endomorph, mesomorph. It's like, okay, there's another level of detail here that I did not expect. And for example, talking about, okay, yes, we can go and look at a player, but you need to analyze what type of player is he playing against, what's the shape of that player, what age is that player, etc. And so there was a lot more detail to consider than I first realized. And then actually, when those players who were scouted then came in to the talent ID day or center, and I was coaching them, you could then start to see, all right, these players who are now coming in, I'm starting to get a real understanding of how they could potentially now fit into or have opportunities within the actual academy. And what was great to see is that either the first or second year of the talent ID sessions that we were doing, there was something like 36 players went on to get scholarships at clubs. And that was success, because even though it wasn't at Arsenal, some of them went on to the likes of Liverpool, Man City, and they were just coming from grassroots. And so it was great to be able to see how just making sure that the preparation that you do to be able to scout these players, they can still go on and have opportunities. And what was great for me to see which was this week, on the Arsenal bench, you saw two of those players in the Champions League, who were Maldini and Cameron Ishmael. And both of them came through that talent ID from grassroots into the academy.
I wanted to, it's a great way to end that period, I would say, of your career off, because I want to get into the transition of starting to realize, okay, maybe I should get into kind of the coaching education side, and potentially, I'm curious, did you think it could become something where now you're running it as your own business, and you're growing it to where it's become your full-time thing? I'm curious that transitional stage of thinking like, okay, maybe I can expand into something on my own here, and create something and build something on my own. And then also tie in the social media aspect. I'm curious where all that kind of came together.
Sure. So I never thought that I would go into this, but I think when you recognize a need and you can't unsee it, then you realize that there's also a responsibility. And as much as I enjoy it, I also feel like I have a responsibility to be able to help those who want to work in the professional academy and elite game. And it also came off the back of me just having conversations with friends of mine who've been in the industry, or those who came out of the industry, those who were struggling to come into the industry, and just looking around and actually seeing how much truth is being told about what it actually takes to work in this industry. And I reflected on my own journey, and a lot that was being said was, do your badges, get your CV. But then when I had my journey and reflected on my journey, the first 3 opportunities I got in academies were through networking, mentoring. Of course, I needed to be able to coach, but I didn't have to do a CV to be able to get into these opportunities. And that only came later on in my journey. And then after me interviewing 100 plus professionals in the game over these last 6 months, 75% of their journey has also been through networking. And so I started recognizing, of course, a trend here. And one of the snapshots I like to give to coaches is your badges, they're your dress code, but your network is your ticket. So you have to get your badges, of course, and it's, again, a great opportunity to be able to network, and, of course, in terms of education for you as a coach. But ultimately, you've got to do the networking. And one of the key things that I notice every single time I speak to a coach, even those who have coached at some of the highest competitions, they always say to me, "Yeah, I think I avoid that bit. I think I need to do more of that." But that's a key part. That's an absolutely crucial part. And so I decided that, look, let me put on a free workshop. That's what I did first. I said, I'm going to put on a free workshop, developing the skills to become a professional academy coach. And the first thing I said to coaches on there, this is not about game models. This is not about session plans. This is not about philosophies. Those things, yes, are all critical for your craft and our craft, but this is what actually you need to focus on. And just seeing how coaches have started to apply it and have started to get opportunities it's just made me smile, really has made me smile. And I'm so overjoyed to see how some coaches are already starting to be able to progress and actually see how they can now start getting to the level that they want to. And for me, it's a case of, I'm just going to continue. I'm going to continue because there's so many coaches out there who are, what I say is, on an island. They're on an island and they feel alone. They do their badges, but then in between that, they don't know where to go. They have no navigation, no direction. And so what I'm trying to do is help coaches to have that for a longer period of time, to be able to know exactly what they need to do. And then where it comes to the social media, I originally started that out actually posting around sessions I was doing, because I started doing one-to-one sessions, group sessions, for players who wanted to get into academies, but also players who I had coached and wanted extra sessions. Of course, if you're in an academy or you're at the top level, you're going to be doing extras, and that's just part and parcel of the game now. And so I was doing that, really enjoyed it, But then after a while, I obviously wanted to be able to focus on helping the coaches, and I decided if I'm really going to give it the best shot, I've then got to tone down the coaching to be able to turn up being able to support coaches.
So before we get into, I want to dive into it and unpack it a little bit more, but maybe we should just describe, so what is it that you're actually doing now? If you want to dive into the Coach Accelerator program and what you do on your socials, that would be, I think, helpful for the audience before we get into it a little bit more.
Sure. So the Coach Accelerator program is helping coaches to have the skills that they need to navigate this industry for the journey that they want to have. Now, what does that mean? That means, firstly, you've got to understand the percentages. So I did a bit of a review around clubs from category 1 to category 4 and did an estimate of how many staff that they would have, knowing that, for example, at category 1, you'd probably have 3 academy coaches per age group, etc., and work their way down, whereas category 4 academy, you have an under 18s only upwards. And when I then divided that by the number of coaches in the UK, approximately only about 0.12% of coaches work in professional academies. And so that's the first thing that I let coaches know, that, look, you're going into an industry which is incredibly hard to be able to get into an academy, let alone into first team. So in terms of mindset, you're going to have to be resilient. And that's the first thing that I present to the coaches. And then I help them to understand, firstly, what's the journey you want to go on. So that's the 10-year plan. And then I help them with strategies around networking, strategies when they go to CPDs, understanding how to connect with people in the industry online. And then, of course, there'll be additional support around their session planning, things like principles of play that they'll need to be able to understand as a coach, and give them that support between badges as much as when they're on their badges. So it's a holistic program to support coaches in their overall development. But what I enjoy the most is that it's a driven community of coaches who want to support each other and they want to grow together. And that's probably one of the best things about the community. And then when it came to some of the socials that I now share, it's really geared towards, one, informing coaches of the industry they're going into, two, being able to share what other coaches see and recognize as key things from their experience. And you probably would have seen me, obviously one of the most recent ones is with Daniel Locke, who's been a guest on the Insiders Lounge. And then the third one is to say things that unfortunately some coaches feel they cannot say. Because it's either they are, of course, part of a club. I'm not saying that all things are bad, but there are certain things they can't say there, or maybe they're scared of potential backlash. And for me, I just want to make sure that people are as clued up as possible.
I want to get into we're discussing kind of the coaching program as a whole. And you kind of mentioned some of the key aspects that you focus on. So you focus on the sort of what people don't realize is a part of the coaching journey, and you kind of help them along that. Why is it that you have to be here? Like, why is it that there has to be a program that you've set up to help coaches? Why isn't this just a part of the system already? Like, I think if you focus on the coaching badges specifically, you've got a real focus on the tactical side of what you're actually doing as a coach. But how come there's not this focus on like actually helping coaches along their journey? I'm curious if you can kind of, I don't know if that makes sense, but dive a little bit more into those aspects.
I do want to start off by saying I do think there are some programs around supporting coaches when potentially they might be out of work. One or two programs, I think, at the highest level, like that the LMA do. But in short, I think it's because no one's really taken the time to actually think about it in detail and actually speak to coaches about the trajectory of their journey, and also share the challenges in depth. So what are some of these challenges? Guess what? You're probably going to have to do a lot of volunteering first. So what does that mean? Either it might be that you're taken care of at home because you're staying at home and you don't have any costs, or you're going to have to work 1, 2, 3 jobs. there was a time where I worked 4 jobs to be able to still get the experience that I wanted, and making sure that they are clear on that, and it's not sugar coated, or it's not a case of, oh, 5 years down the line, I don't know if I can continue this, because they didn't expect it. And so one of the things that I always say to coaches is that there's got to be a way that you are able to fund your own journey. And that's why I also have, for example, spoken to Debidan Osakita, who used to work at Goldman Sachs as a trader, and I've done an interview with him to help coaches understand about investing. Because if you know how to utilize your money a bit better, then that can help fund maybe your badges. It can help fund you to be able to do a volunteering role, traveling to a club once or twice a week. And now it means that you can maybe fast track your journey a bit more, because you're not now struggling in that way. There's also the realities of how many times you may have to move, or maybe living away from your loved ones, and that's again a reality. There's also the reality of the hours, whereby if you're at a London club and you're going to a club in Manchester, guess what? You're going to be away for a whole day. You may be away for a weekend, and you're going to be working weekends. I had a chat with a coach recently, and he was talking about balance and wanting to make sure that his social life is still as it can be. And I said, look, the reality is that you're probably going to be working weekends for a very long time if this is what you want to do, and you're going to have to accept that if that's the journey, if you want to go on the journey of being a coach. If not, then that's your decision. But I think that coaches do need to understand that very early. And to give you an example, for 7 years, I used most of my annual leave to do my badges, and I had a missus, who's still with me.
Somehow you convinced her to stay around.
But that's having those conversations that I've used another 6, 7 for my badges is tough. And I had 7 years where I didn't have any summer period off. And so it's helping coaches to understand those realities. And I don't know why it's not discussed as much as is needed, because all coaches know this, and many who are in the game understand this. But I hope that I'm able to raise those conversations now, and coaches can have more clarity on that.
You mentioned the interview with the Goldman Sachs member.
It's trader Debidan, yeah.
Yeah, and we had Guilherme Henry on the podcast, who's now at One Knox in the U.S. And when he was coaching in Florida at the semi-professional level, he would do a similar thing, but with local professional businessmen for his players. So he could show his players, look, this is how you get into real estate. This is understanding how to buy a house, how to get a mortgage, or how to apply for a credit card. Just little things that you don't realize. Whether you're in the footballing industry or not, you still have to deal with life in general. And I think those are a lot of the points that you're touching on there, that if you want to excel in any career, you've got to put in extra time. You've got to make sacrifices. There's all these little things that people don't necessarily realize also apply to football, because football's a business just like anything else. And,
exactly.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the earlier it's shared with coaches, I think the better. Let's not wait until the coach is 10 years down the line, and he or she's now thinking, I'm probably going to have to say goodbye to this. But actually, if they know earlier on, then I think they'll be in a lot better position by the time it gets to year 10, year 15, and they can actually enjoy the journey more, because they have an expectation. They have a clear expectation of what are some of the challenges and roadblocks which may come up, and they can also have those conversations with their loved ones who will also be on the journey with them, and say, look, this is the reality of the journey that I'm going on. This is how I need your support. Do you want to come on the journey with me?
Yeah, very well said. And you were discussing a lot about your journey, specifically your kind of testimony in this, going through it, and the experiences you had and how you can now teach others. I'm curious from now your perspective of seeing others go through the journey and you kind of being a part of their journey and helping them. Is there some success stories that you can touch on, and then how that's impacted you in terms of being the educator now or being the mentor for them?
Definitely. I think the first one, and this was, for example, I did a free webinar on trying to get into your B license, and there was a message that still to this day, and it will remain with me for the rest of my life. There was someone who messaged me and said, "Look, I'm disabled, and I have tried 6 years. I didn't know if I would be able to actually get onto the UEFA B license." And he said, "I've managed to get onto the B license after going on your webinar, and now I know I can even get employment as well." There's no greater, hearing something like that really has showed me how much it's needed, that support for coaches. And in terms of on the Accelerator masterclass, so we had, for example, two coaches go into a category one, so it's a Premier League pre-academy after the first 3 months. We've had someone go into a Scottish women's first division team. Of recent, one of the coaches who used the CPD strategy that I coach, using that, he was then, and he's only a UEFA C licensed coach, he was able to be invited into an academy to observe, volunteer for twice a week. And then this year he spoke to me, and I checked in with him. How's it going? He said, "Oh, Temisan, you won't believe it. I'm now I've now been invited to come into the pre-academy, and they've given me this job opportunity now, a paid job opportunity." And I sent him, "Fantastic. Those are the hidden opportunities we talk about when you just position yourself." And that all started from using the CPD strategy, that when he went to the club to make sure he could network effectively, he was unable to, a couple months later, get a paid role within the pre-academy. And one of the things he then said to me is that all the coaches he's seen, they then usually take their group into the academy. He can now see his route into the academy.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I don't think any amount of money can kind of reward you in the same way as those stories of helping others. It just progress in life in general. If you take football and everything away from it, you're just helping them in life and helping potentially their families and their kids and so on. There's
It's great.
a big impact behind that.
Yeah, it's great, Chad. It's special, and I think it's even more special when I remember how I first started my journey, and now being able to help those at the beginning of their journey, and even those who maybe are in their journey after 3-4 years, to see where they're able to progress to in a short space of time. It just pushes me on further.
I want to get through some just like general coaching questions, and I think we can
Sure.
almost do this in like a quick fire format. Just kind of the first thing that comes to mind. So for you, what separates a good coach from someone who's top 1% in the game?
Really good question. And the first thing I would say is, you cannot be compared to those who are trying to win Champions Leagues, Premier Leagues, because they are dealing with the 0.0001% of players. The majority of players are going to be grassroots players. And so I think there's important separation between the two. Those, of course, at the very top end of the game, yes, you can say in terms of what they win. But I also think, and this was really highlighted from Arsene Wenger's time at Arsenal, the club was in a economically and a operationally at a very good level. And so even just making sure from a business perspective, I think coaches can have, and head coaches can have, a very good influence on that, and the culture at the club. So I think that's very key. Now, when it comes to grassroots, ultimately it's helping players with the longevity of their desire for the sport. And for me, what a great coach does is just foster that and helps a player to be able to see the potential that they have within playing the game, but also just maintaining that love for the game.
Yeah, I think the passion behind it is so key. What is the most important skill for a coach? I know we kind of differed between a good coach and a top 1%, but if there's one skill that you would say is extremely important.
Self-awareness. I think self-awareness. And the reason why I say self-awareness is because that's really the foundation for you to then be able to recognize what you need to develop. If you are not aware of your habits, if you're not aware of the knowledge that you're missing, and most importantly, if you're not aware of what strengths you have, I think as a coach, you can underserve those who you're trying to serve as a coach, both players and also the coaches and MDT team who you're working with. So I think coaches just need to take a bit more time, if they're not already, understanding themselves and reflecting on what are my values, what are my key skills as a coach already, and what do I need to develop, and continuing that cycle, you'll find yourself in a much better position long term. And I'd say pay attention to what others say about you ultimately, because if you focus on the self-awareness piece for helping others, then ultimately the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, I think it's important to ask for feedback, but also listen to it and at least acknowledge it, and ask for feedback from people that you appreciate and you acknowledge in terms of what they've done in their career or where they're headed, or sort of their role in your life at that moment. I think is
Exactly.
extremely important.
Exactly.
If you weren't involved in football, where do you think you would have? What route do you think you would have gone down? Or is that even an option?
Good question. I think if I wasn't involved in football, it would probably then have been a doctor.
Mm.
I think so. Yeah, I think I I actually originally was going to go into neuroscience, and I'm still a bit fascinated by the brain. So I think if it was neuroscience, yeah, I could see myself doing that.
You've got plenty of years ahead of you, so you might as well. You never know. You never know what happens.
Go get a neuroscience degree and start talking to them about tactics while I'm.
What is there one team, so past or present, but a specific team in terms of a year that you would have just loved to coach, that you find that you would have connected well with, or just it would have been an incredible experience for you?
It has to be the Brazil 2002 team. I mean, Ronaldinho is my best player of all time. Best player of all time, because he just played with a smile on his face. Didn't care whether I didn't care whether they won or lost. I just wanted to see what he would do on the pitch. And so that team with Ronaldinho, Rivaldo, Kaká, R9, Lucio, Gilberto Silva, Cafu, Roberto Carlos. I mean, they were just world-class players all over the pitch. It was a phenomenal team. And so if I could just coach, I just think to myself, what would you even say on the
Yeah,
side?
that's what I was going to say now.
what do you even say to that team? It's just, it's been a pleasure coaching you.
Yeah, you take so many teams. I think there was that period at Barca. Like right now, I'm reading a book. I think it's called Inside Barca, and it really breaks down kind of the mechanics of how Cruyff really set the club up. Pep kind of took it over to the next level. But even like for Pep, like some of the years that he had with that team, I don't even know like how you end up actually giving feedback. Like where do you say? Like for me, my brain just can't even comprehend it. Maybe that's why I'm not coaching at a top level anywhere.
What do you say to Messi when he's just dribbled past 7 players and scored? Yeah, just do that again.
Yeah, wasn't too bad. Wasn't too bad. If you could sit down with one person, past or present, for a meal, who would it be and why?
It would be Ronaldinho, and the reason why is because I don't think I've really seen any interviews from him, and I remember seeing him from. I remember seeing the clips from when he used to play futsal, and I'd just like to know how do you have such a smile, passion, joy on your face when you're playing? Because I can't remember another player who had that joy every single time they stepped on the pitch. And so for me, I would just love to be able to have that conversation with him and find out a bit more around him as a player and
I
as a
think
person. Sorry.
he's one of the many, one of the many people who I think are just misunderstood in the industry as well. I think there's, if you could be able to hear more about their life and how they grew up and what they believe in and all these little things, I think you would start to understand them more, like you said, as a person rather than a player, which I think
Exactly.
is so
Because
important.
I remember hearing, for example, when he was at Barcelona, that he would, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that after games he'd go missing for 2 days,
Yeah.
and then he'd be back, you know. And I'm like, how do you go missing for 2 days and maybe go and, I don't know, clubbing and come back and you're still the best player? Well, how does this make sense?
It reminds me of Dennis Rodman. I watched the Michael Jordan
Oh yes,
documentary
yes,
on
yeah.
Netflix,
I've seen
and
it.
same
Yeah,
thing. He would just be gone, and they would actually let him go because they
yeah,
knew he needed that for his mentality and so on, and would come back and break the record for rebounds in a game. And it's just
yeah.
like, this doesn't add up. This is not what I'm supposed to be coaching players, and this is
No,
the example that they're watching. So it's definitely fascinating.
but I think it really ties into the fact that you need to know, as a coach, you need to really understand the players who you have, and that wouldn't work with a Michael Jordan. You couldn't say go in. He's like, "What are you talking about? I'm going to be here 4 a.m. in the morning," for example. But Dennis Rodman needed something like that, and that's definitely a key skill of a coach, and that's where you need to, for as much as there's a detail around the session, you need to be even more detailed with understanding the individuals who you're coaching.
Yeah, so important. I want to give this last little bit before we wrap things up, just to shout out anything that you're working on currently, all the school program, everything that you have going on, and then we'll wrap things up for the episode.
Appreciate it. So, for any coaches around the world who just need some support and you feel as though you're on an island, you can join. We've got 2 school communities. So there's one free community and then the other community, which is our coach Accelerator Masterclass community for paid members. But I'm running a free 7-day trial, so you can check it out. It's not one of these trials whereby you only get 20%. You actually get to see 100% of what's on the community and just have a conversation as well. I'm happy to have a conversation with any coaches from anywhere. There are coaches from almost every single continent on the Coach Accelerator community.
Yeah, we'll have all the links below in the description, as well as your socials and so on. Temisan, thanks again for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to speaking again soon.
You too, Chad. Absolutely loved it, and looking forward to round 2.
Have a good one. Cheers.
You too.